Serious, what is the scariest thing that has happened to you in near the woods? Camping with some friends on the Northern Irish border. Solid night, a few drinks, nice fire, and we turned in late. After 20 minutes of settling down, the fire, which had been well and truly stamped out, starts back up. We can see the glow through the tent walls. Being lazy 15 years olds, we don't go back out and sort it. Another few minutes pass and we hear some footsteps. One of us calls out, "Who is there?" No response. More footsteps. Twigs crack, and now as they pass close to the tent, whoever is out there brushes the tent wall. We call out again. No response. More footsteps. The number increases. They brush gently against the tent walls more and more. It sounds like 20 or 30 people walking around the tents as quietly as possible, wiping their hands on the tent walls, trying to freak us out. Needless to say, we are pretty terrified. After way too long paralyzed, I crawl out of the tent. Still a dark, moonless night with only the smoldering remains of the fire giving off a dull red glow. I see nothing, no one. Hours of broken, restless sleep and more of the same terrifying noises. The sun rises. We get out of our tents greeted by the sight of 50 or so sheep. Heavy winds had blown life back into our fire and blown down a section of fence, giving the sheep an escape from a nearby field to our clearing. In the end, I was just glad none of the sheep had caught fire. This is the most Irish horror story I can imagine reading. I used to work at a summer camp in the hill country. After the kids went to sleep, the counselors would go about screwing around and doing the usual stupid things that 18-24-year-olds do when minimally supervised and plenty of space to roam. One night, on a full moon, a group of us had taken one of the trucks out to a nearby field to smoke and drink. The field was surrounded by woods, filled with waist-high grass, and had a single road running down the middle of it. We stopped in the exact center of the field and were chilling for about 20 minutes when someone says, "Who is that?" It wasn't a what but a who question, which piqued my interest. I turned around, and at the entrance to the field where we had come from, there's this person just standing there. They were about 100 yards off and it was night time, clear with a full moon, so we couldn't make out much detail except that they were wearing light white clothes and were white. It was super weird. We called to them to come join us, but they just started pacing back and forth in front of the entrance to the field. This went on for a couple of minutes. Welp. About 2/3 RDS of the people in the truck bed of the truck were high and started to work themselves into a stoner's paranoia, so my buddy and I took over the cab and turned the truck around to put the high beams on whomever was over there at the edge of the woods. With the beams out, we could see them pacing back and forth. As soon as we flipped them on, it was just field and woods with road going off straight ahead. Turn the lights off and there the person is pacing back and forth. Lights on, person gone. Lights off, white figure clearly walking back and forth. The people in the back of the truck were losing their freaking minds at this point. I turned to my buddy in the driver's seat and said, "We have to drive through there to get to the camp." He just says, "Yup." I told everyone in the back to sit down and that we were heading back. One girl starts crying. Two guys are pulling out pocket knives. Terrible idea since they're in the back of a bouncing pickup truck on a dirt road and stoned out of their minds. The last guy just grabs the side of the truck and looks terrified. We turn on the high beams and drove towards the entrance. No figure in sight. We pass into the woods along the road. No figure. Someone from the bed of the truck yells she's still there after we pass through. We got back to the camp, hit the beer and weed, and never went back to that field again. When I told a sanitized version of that story to the campers, they laughed at me. I had never seen anything like that before or since, but I am now convinced I saw a ghost. I don't know what it was about, but I saw it. Be in the middle of the Australian bush, at least 50 km from any civilization or human. I'm hunting with my brother and we are startled by what seems to be a perfectly clean and unused oven. Just sitting there. No dust, nothing. It even still had warranty tags hanging off it and everything. We just continued on our way feeling confused and weirded out. Probably a nervous shapeshifter who panicked and the first thing he could think of was an oven. During my time in America, I wandered into the woods with my family and we happened upon a grizzly bear. It was luckily asleep, so we backed away from it and decided against walking in the woods for the rest of our vacation. I used to walk my dog down near the river, along the same path every day, which had a section going through the woods. One day he just passed that section up and walked towards the sidewalk instead. I went along with it because it was the same amount of time. Either way, I happened to glance down the path as we passed it and saw two figures dart into the woods. I passed people all the time on that path, even after dark like that night, and I never got chilled like that before. Even the really weird stuff didn't really bother me. Something about those guys was different, and I think my dog knew it. He was a good dog. He used to knock me down and stand on me when he heard gunshots and stuff like that. He saved me a lot, but I couldn't save him. He died of a brain tumor when he was 3. I'll probably never have another dog, TBH. He was it. Or, 3 years is not long enough. My first dog died of kidney failure at age 2. I thought I'd never get another dog, but I've had 2 since then and they've all been wonderful friends. I live near the woods, and that's creepy it is, but I always hear music. Like wait in the driveway and randomly hear music box music. Scared the crap out of me when I first heard it. My family hears it too. I'm too scared to go into the woods to look. I used to work on a wilderness trail crew way back in the backcountry in southern New Mexico. We saw our share of everything from black bears and rattlesnakes to scorpions and black widows. For one trip, it was just me and one other crew member finishing the last little bit of a through trail. We'd worked as far as possible from either end with bigger crews and just had to fix up the dead middle of the trail. We had a few pack animals with us to carry our tools, and other than that we were alone. 3 days into the 6-day trip, I noticed a deer hanging around our camp. It's not that unusual. The horses have a sort of pellet food we bring out for them, and both deer and bears like it, so we have to chase them off every once in a while. What was unusual was this deer wasn't standing near the food. She was on the other edge of camp alone, just standing there. There were no other deer anywhere around. Odd for an animal that travels in herds. But again, I didn't think too much of it the first day, and the day after I saw her again, and the third day, she never came near the food at all, nor were there any deer with her ever. She didn't even move very much and was basically always in the same spot. The third day I decided she was kind of creeping me out and I went out to try and shoo her away. Most deer are skittish and run as soon as they see you coming near them. She stood absolutely still, head up, faced my way, and then I saw her eyes. All deer have dark eyes, but hers were solid black and hollowed into her head. They were matte instead of shiny, and black goo dripped down the fur below them. I freaking ran back to my camp. She still didn't run, but just sort of shuffled off later. She was still around the next day, but thankfully we were packing out and I didn't have to get near her. Later I realized it was probable she had something like chronic wasting disease or some other problem deer can get, and I'm sure if I hadn't been so startled by the eyes, I would have seen that she was emaciated or had other open lesions. But that scared me so freaking much I thought she was some kind of monster. My crewmate didn't like her either, but only said yeah, there's something wrong with that one. So I was around 11-12 and used to spend most days and evenings after school in the forest mountain biking with some friends. It was a time when we had extremely hot summers and near daylight at 9 PM, so naturally we'd stay super late and session the downhill trails. I lived the furthest away out of all of us at the time, about 6 miles, and would stay late and do some extra runs, as I didn't have anyone to ride home with. One night after everyone made their way out and back home, I decided I was going to do 2 more runs and set off for home. I hit the trail and hauled butt all the way to the bottom and stopped dead on a flat run out at the end. Something primal took over. I had the feeling I was being watched. I whipped off my goggles and helmet and started to push up slowly, thinking I was being paranoid. I got the chills and started hearing sounds. Footsteps in the dirt, slogging, bushes. I pushed up faster until I hit part of the trail that was separated by an island of trees. I stopped and the noises were close. I looked through the trees and on the other side was a crazed looking man, fairly dirty and dripping with sweat. He had a claw hammer in his hand and was looking around on the prowl. I suddenly felt paralyzed with pure terror. I picked up my bike so its wheels were off the ground, so he couldn't hear the freewheel ticking sound, and stood there, totally thinking I was about to die. I hear the same thing about 5 feet to my rear and there is a bigger man of similar description, also with a hammer. I stand there, motionless in this 8 feet wide island of trees for what felt like 10 minutes with my downhill bike in my skinny 12 years old arms. They passed up the trail and I have never moved so fast out of that place. My heart was pounding and I felt sick. I got onto the road into the small rural town I rode through on the way home and sat on a wall shaking. I got home and went to my room and never told anyone. Was camping in the mountains with friends. It was dark and we had a campfire going. Heard a scream from around the road. Sounded like a woman. We all freaked out. The scream happened again but closer. One girl, terrified, started crying. Rest of us armed ourselves. We could hear something walking up the gravel road. It was near. I ran to the car, flipped on the headlights. A goat trotted by. I was walking in the woods behind my house and came across a tiny cleared area with an old shed. I was intrigued because it was in remarkable condition for being in the middle of nowhere with no trail leading to it. On closer inspection I saw that there were garbage bags taped to the windows inside, and the shed was locked with a heavy padlock. I pulled the chain, trying to open it. Out of curiosity and stupidity, I decided to walk to the edge of the little clearing and see if I could see anything in the woods on the other side. As I was peering through the trees, out of the corner of my eye I saw something move. I looked up, and there was a camera following my every movement. That is when I realized what I had found was not ruins of an old farm and I got the heck out of there. I was terrified that I was going to be attacked by some gang that was growing making whatever. But my dad told me I probably looked like Alice in Wonderland out there and not to worry. It's been over 13 years so I think he was right. Kind of funny, actually. There's decommissioned train tracks next to a Dunkin' Donuts in my town. It was around 7 PM when me and my friend decided to walk down them. It gradually gets darker, pitch black and a thick forest with the nearest civilization being the Dunkin' and whatever is all the way down the tracks. We have our flashlights out and it resembles a video game. I was so scared but so excited. We get to a bridge overlooking a lake. The drop is at least 10 feet. We went back in the morning to see it, and it looked like we were staring into the void. We keep walking, joking about how we're gonna get killed when we hear a noise. It sounded like distorted radio chatter just across the bridge. We pause and hear it again, but louder. He grabbed my arm and we just sprinted all the way down. He's talking to me, saying it's okay, we're gonna be okay, there's nothing there, and when we finally reached the end he told me I didn't want to say it while we were in there, but I really thought we were going to die. Reminds me of the dynamic between me and my best friend. When we're in a situation where we both don't know what to do or we're scared, she'll act calm and collected even though I know she's crapping it too. I'm the one who audibly freaks out every time. Feel bad that she has to put up with me in those situations, LMAO. Apologies for length. Hiking at Waterton National Park in Canada. Parked the car and hiked a good 45 minutes or so up one particular trail. This trail had some neat 10-15 foot waterfalls, and even if the water flow wasn't high, these were the trail sites. They were nice. We passed families or couples being cute together along the way. Me and my companion decided we'd have a quick break, smoke some weed, and see what the rest of the trail has to offer before turning back to the car. What started as a trail wide enough that 5 people could stand shoulder to shoulder easily, it had narrowed down to a foot trail maybe 6-8 inches wide that you could only just walk single file up. About a foot or so to the left was a 10-foot drop into the river. A foot to my right was an climbable incline with thick vegetation. We were coming around a bend in the trail, had about 40 feet of straight path before it disappeared around another bend. It was at that exact moment that 2 adolescent black bears rounded that bend down that path, and the lead bear had looked right at us. In what felt like an eternity, it was likely 5-10 seconds. We slowly started backing away, and I gave the greatest war cry that would put Gromhell Scream from the Warcraft universe to shame. It did basically nothing. The lead bear kept looking but stopped moving. Its partner walked into its butt and gave both a little startle. They were focused on each other as we disappeared around the bend, staring at the bears as we did. A few steps backward later after losing line of sight, and it was 5 minutes of running as light-footed as possible before we saw another human. We never saw the mama black bear, but she had to be close, real close. It scared the crap out of both of us, and we spent the 3-hour drive back home basically just periodically yelling fricking bears during sentences or in moments of silence. And for the rest of the afternoon those 2 bears kept saying fricking humans in moments of silence. Thankfully I never saw him, but I lived directly next door to the woods and there was a guy flashing his dong to people and tossing off at the entrance every day. It's the only way I can come and it's a great way to pass the time and keep looking young. A not so funny story. When we were like 10 we biked around the neighborhood and decided to go on the side of the highway, very low traffic country highway, and found a body someone dumped in a bag. Never opened it, but was a missing person in with some drug related crime people. I don't know if this counts, but a few years ago I was diagnosed with psychotic depression, and I guess the scariest thing that happened to me in the woods was suddenly finding myself in the woods. I had a major psychotic episode one night before I was diagnosed and found myself deep in the woods. I live in a pretty forested area, with no shoes on and no idea where I was or how I got there. No phone or flashlight either. I can't describe the fear and confusion of just suddenly being somewhere. I've experienced a similar thing with sleepwalking somewhere and not waking up in my bed. Pretty freaky, but I can't imagine waking up in the middle of the goddamn woods alone at night. I was camping with about 5 of my friends. We set up in the same forest as we would usually and just sat around talking with our flashlights on. One of my friends, I'll call him Kevin, said he quickly needed to go to the gas station. It was quite close to where we set up, so it wasn't that out of the ordinary. Once he had left after around 2-3 minutes I started hearing a quiet high-ish pitch voice saying come here from where Kevin had left. When I asked my friends about it they said it was most likely Kevin as his voice wasn't that deep either. But the voice kept getting deeper. Every time it would say come here it would sound slowed down, like if you slowed down a YouTube video. Eventually one of my other friends, let's call him John, stood up to go check out what it was. Then Kevin came up behind us carrying a couple snacks and drinks. When John turned around and saw Kevin, the voice in an extraordinarily deep pitch said come here. It wasn't Kevin because he was right behind us. So who was it? That was it. We all started booking it for the gas station. We then heard the voice coming closer and leaves crunching behind us. Once we got to the station we told the cashier to lock the doors. He was reluctant at first, but when he saw a dark figure rushing towards us he happily obliged. We got some other friends to pick us up, and let's say we never went back to that forest. I was in Boy Scouts and went camping with my troop near a lake in the woods. We went camping here every year during the summer for a week. Anyway, on this particular day the weather was pretty crappy, in particular very windy. At first we didn't think much of it until it started getting really dark out in the middle of the afternoon and we started seeing a bunch of funnels start forming in the sky. At first we were kind of fascinated and it started to hail out a bit. But then the wind started picking up and we watched as a funnel start forming and getting bigger and bigger right across the lake from where we were camped, and our adult leaders go into full panic mode. They have us run a little ways down from the campsite to this sort of ditch area. We were all watching as the funnel turned into a tornado on the lake and started making its way toward us. That's when we were like, oh crap. It came pretty close to us but thankfully changed directions and all we got was really wet from the lake water it was blowing around. We watched it go for a while longer before it went away. So yeah, that was pretty scary. I was hiking in the woods with my older brother, on a pretty public trail. About an hour into the hike we hear FFSSSSSSSSSS thud. We look over and there is a hunting arrow lodged in the tree very close to where we were walking. We started shouting, hey, there are people here, but no one ever shouted back. I still don't know if it was just a poacher freaking up or if someone was actually trying to kill me. I worked at a camp in the Sierra Nevadas in California, in bear territory. The camp had seen bears coming through fairly regularly over the years, but most were fairly easily scared off. The year previous to me working there weren't many sightings of any kind, let alone an invasive incident. We started having incidents that summer, mostly found after the intrusions into tents and such. Then the bear was seen firsthand a time or two, and wasn't easy to scare off. One night I'm walking down the hill toward the main lodge and there are other staffers already banging on pots and barking like dogs trying to scare off the bear. They stopped, and I figured they'd succeeded, and I didn't know exactly where the bear was. There was a bin directly behind the lodge where trash was accumulated before being hauled to a bear-proof dumpster a ways out of camp each evening. As I pass this bin, I see a couple of staffers to my left, with the bin on the right, and they look rather fixed on the bin. I stop dead in my tracks and look to my right, and there's the 400 plus lb dark brown faced black bear, about 10 feet away, looking back at me. He does a deep huff at me, looking me right in the eye. I know better than to freak and run, and instead I stand staring back a moment. The bear looks away just a bit, and I take this as my cue to slowly turn back and slowly start walking on my way again. There's an odd tension to holding back the urge to run, metering your movements to be slow and deliberate. Thankfully, it worked, and the appeal of trash was greater than wanting to get rid of me. I was the shooting sports director, and one of my duties was to fire a salute cannon at flag ceremonies. It was a small replica meant for small boats to fire salutes, and used 10 gauge shotgun blanks. After passing the end of the lodge, I turned, walked up the porch, and went inside and immediately got the cannon and around. The back ramp header access was directly opposite the trash bin. The bear was still there, and I went down the first slope of the ramp. It seemed like I didn't have a clear shot for maximum effect, so I walked halfway down the next slope, a zigzag affair. I set it down, pointed directly at the bear, and fired. The bear took off running behind the bin, until its feet landed in the creek behind the lodge, and it decided it should stop and take a drink. After drinking, it started to amble back toward the trash bin. For that night, I gave up. The state ended up issuing a permit and I shot the bear about 2 weeks later, in a similar bin raid. I was on vacation on a coastal town in my country that's in the middle of a forest by the sea. We had been drinking with my friends and was pretty drunk and ready to play some poker, but everyone decided to call it a night. I didn't want to go to sleep, so I took a shot of moonshine, grabbed my coat and mountain bike and decided to go for a ride at 3 AM. I decided to leave my phone on the house since there's no reception anywhere in the town. I just took my ID in case the police stopped me and some cash to buy some cigarettes. I went to the town center and got the cigs. Decided to go to the beach. Hung around there but got really cold since it was winter and there was a lot of wind. I then decided to ride around the outskirts of town and through the woods. As I'm getting deeper and deeper into the forest, I keep hearing sounds, so I stop and check my surroundings. I then see 3 sets of glowing eyes in the dark, staring at me. I decide to get the frick out of there. As I'm getting closer to one of the roads circling town, I hear the leaves rustling and lo and behold, there's a pack of 5 stray dogs running at me full speed. I manage to get to the road and they start catching up. The roads are made of compressed sand that had gotten pretty loose over the course of the day, so I couldn't accelerate that much, and they started trying to bite my legs and my bike. One caught my right leg by the pant fabric and I managed to kick his head. Luckily, as the other dogs were about to catch up to me, a car passed by and honked at us and they decided to chase for the car. It took me an hour to figure out where I was and get to the house. The next day I was talking to a park ranger about this and he told me to be careful since there's a pack of stray dogs that's been killing cats and house dogs for 2 weeks now. TLDR, I got attacked by a pack of wild dogs that preyed on local pets. We were on a school trip with the entire year. Late at night, we, only one class, walked through a small forest which had quite a lot of wild animals. The people guiding the tour were quite young and really careful, warning us about the animals, especially wild boars. As we entered the woods we didn't see anything as we were not allowed to take anything like flashlights or phones with us, so we couldn't attract, or wake up, any animals. We were not warned about us having to walk one specific part alone though. We were told it's because the boars are usually in that part and our footsteps could wake them. The first guide was the first to go and reach a safer area and light up her flashlight as a signal. I could hear a small river and I was the second student to walk alone in the utter darkness. As I was trying my best not to get off the path by accident, I felt hopeless. It was one of the scariest things I've ever experienced in my life when I started to hear a breath and a sound not my own and a slight warmth near my leg. At which point I started to quietly try and not cry. I remember it feeling like eternity until I finally reached the guide and a guy from my class. I'm still not sure if it was really a boar I encountered, but I sure as heck was scared for my life. They gave the signal to the other guide, which was quickly answered, meaning the next one would go. Most people from my class ended up crying. Oh, and English is not my first language. I hope you still understood it. Right, so I was about 13 or 14 when my family decided to go camping. I went off my own to explore. We were in a sort of nature park when suddenly the wind picked up. The trees sounded creaky and it was really eerie. I felt a twinge of dread. Like suddenly I was not safe, and that's when I saw them. Graves. Like actual gravestones just in the middle of these woods, and I walked a little closer to get a better look. They were old, like at least 100 years. The gravestones were close to each other but in 2 rows, about a dozen in total. I looked at the dates and they were from 1890s, and the spooky part was that the graves weren't for adults. These were child's graves. Never booked it out of there so fast. Never spoke of it since. It wasn't at all scary really, but while camping in bear country in bear season, something large circled our camp in the middle of the night. It made noise to scare it off maybe. I'll tell this story from my perspective at the time. I was maybe 11 years old. We were on a family camping trip. Me, my younger sister, my mom and dad, my aunt, and perhaps one of my aunt's friends. We're all on a hike with the dogs, and we come to a small river where we decide to stop for a break. The grown-ups sit around and talk and drink beer while my sister and I play in the water. My dad goes out on an inner tube in the river. Then, somewhere in the distance on the other side of the stream, we hear raised voices. 2 men and a woman, shouting indistinctly. First one, then another, sometimes shouting over each other. I can't understand anything they're saying, but the woman starts sounding hysterical. Then, suddenly, bam, bam, bam. The sound of 2 or 3 gunshots rings out, and silence falls. A second later, some more hysterical shouting from someone. I can't remember now if it was a male or female voice, and then more silence. The grown-ups jump up and hurry me and my sister the heck out of Dodge before we can get hit by any stray bullets. I proceed to spend the next 10 years thinking I heard a murder in the woods. Asking my mom about it now, she says she thinks it was some kind of altercation between 2 campsites. I doubt anyone was actually shot. It's rare but not totally unheard of to have to fire warning shots into the air to make threatening buttholes back off in the woods. Bonus story. Many years later, I was on a camping trip with my friends. We're driving down some dirt road, and we come to this giant meadow, and in the middle of the meadow is this tiny, 1-room cabin. It's starting to fall apart, and the windows and door are all boarded up. Keep out is spray painted across the front of it in huge letters. Let's go check it out, say my friends, who would clearly be the first ones to die in a horror movie. We can't get inside, but part if one of the boards over a window is loose, and we're able to pry it back a little and look inside. It's mostly empty within, except for an old, rotting table, and a freaking filthy mattress in a bare, low bed frame in the corner. It looks like a haunted murder house in there. We hang out in the meadow a little, bit by idea the cabin is too freaking creepy, and we eventually leave, half convinced that now we're all going to be murdered in our tents by the witch that lies there for disturbing the cabin, or the serial killer, or ghost, or Jason, or whatever. We went back once the next year and saw the building was surrounded by a new hastily built barbed wire fence, but we decided not to stop this time. It was probably just some random cabin the owner didn't want to deal with anymore but didn't want people, like us, breaking into. But they couldn't have made it look creepier if they had nailed freaking doors to walls or some crap. Actually, yes, that would have made it look creepier. As a teenager, me and a few friends would often go on long walks through fields and woodland. We knew the paths through the woodland like the back of our hand. The paths in the wood were flanked on one side by a 1 meter or so fence, as at the top of the first bit of path was an old quarry. The section at the top that separated the woods and old quarry, however, had a few lengths of barbed wire instead of a fence. So on one particular night we were hanging around on the play park near the entrance to the woods. I was getting bored and tried to get the others moving along, but they were pretty hesitant. Eventually they started talking about how they felt something was off about the place. One of them voiced that we should leave. I had a crush on one of my friends at the time, and as an act of bravado I ventured into the woods alone. Hoping they would follow, I carried on for a couple minutes until I was at the crest of the short hill. All the while, my heart was racing. The woods just had an odd aura. I turn around hoping my friends were behind me. Instead I see a silhouette of a man in a wide-brimmed hat. I get creeped out and freeze. He's about 5 meters away on the other side of the fence. I watch him as he walks, seemingly, through a tree and out the other side. He then walks behind a thin tree trunk and vanishes. I legged it down that path and out the woods. Don't think I've ran that fast before or since. Well, I believe the proper phrase in this situation is frick that noise. I spend a ton of time in the northern British Columbia and Alberta wilderness fishing, hiking, mountain biking etc etc. I've experienced a lot but nothing like that time as my wife and I call it. We were heading for a remote campground in the headwaters reaches of a river basin. Remote as in 150 kilometers down a highway from the nearest town and then 90 km on rough unpaved back road. Remote enough we only saw one other vehicle in a 3-day weekend. That is one of the most popular camping weekends of the season. The weather was warm, sunny and clear with not a cloud in the sky. Absolutely beautiful. This particular area has two campgrounds about 10 kilometers apart, a north site and a south site. We pulled into the south site first and there was a disturbance in the force. That's the best way to describe it. We had our windows rolled down and were stopped as we had planned to hop out and walk around. The sun seemed to chill and disappear, almost like we were in a shadow despite the sun being almost directly above us. In a clear sky and no trees overhead. The wind stopped. Completely. Not a breath of wind. All the birds and squirrels were silent. I couldn't even hear the river 50 yards away. In short, my sixth sense developed over years of backcountry travel was in full overdrive. Something was wrong. Very wrong. It was confirmed when my wife turned to me and in a shaky voice and a face draining of color said I don't like it here. I didn't either. Something was watching us. I've been stalked by a mountain lion, bluff charged by a black bear and snarled at by a grizzly. I don't get unsettled easily. This was different. I reached behind the seat and pulled my 12-gauge shotgun out, slipping 5 Federal Deep Penetrator 1-ounce slugs into the magazine and 1 into the chamber. Flicking off the safety, I set it on the dash and started turning the truck around. It was then we noticed that none of the sites had been used recently and there was an old burned out truck camper tucked into the woods. We pulled out of the site and onto the main road. Almost instantly the sun and warmth came back. The birds were chirping, squirrels chattering and the wind was blowing. We drove the 10 kilometer to the other site and spent a lovely 2 days camped there. On the way home, I pulled back into the creepy site to see if it was a one-off thing. Remember, I'm not spooked easily and trust my instinct. If it had been something like a grizzly triggering my bush sense, he was probably gone. Nope, it was still a bad place. We left and will never go back to that site again. Something truly evil is there. Whether it's current or past, there's evil in that place. If I refuse to get out of a truck, even with a gun literally loaded for bear, there's a problem. It's all verified by the fact that my wife felt the same foreboding and dread at the time. I've never seen her look so scared. My first solo backcountry trip, I broke my stove falling down a wet slope. I didn't notice the crack in my fuel pump and had the match lit before I noticed the growing pool of camp fuel in front of me under my legs. A second later and I would have been dead. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.